So, kind of have to react to probably the most shocking news story that has come out of the WSL arguably this season, and that is the sacking of Melissa Phillips at Brighton. And I'm saying sacking despite their tweets saying that she left, because if you read the press release, she's been sacked. I just did not see this coming.
There is literal, proverbial smoke appearing from Rachel's ears at the moment. We are flabbergasted, I think is the word.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was never in the conversation about whether Mel Phillips would be safe or not. We never even thought of it. If you're thinking about, maybe Rhiannon Skinner, who got her first... I wouldn't justify the sacking of Rhiannon Skinner. I think she's...
But the conversations that have been had...
If you're looking at it, she had 9 winless games. Maybe there would have been a reason for it to have a conversation around that. I have never considered Mel Phillips.
No, the managers...
especially not the first manager of the season to be sacked.
The managers that have been spoken about this season, and maybe none of which I particularly agree with, have been Carla Ward, Rhiannon Skinner, Mark Skinner at times, even a few rumblings about Brian Sorensen. And this just was not in the conversation. Also not involved really in the relegation chat that much, and I appreciate that they're 10th, but they're how many points off?
They're 6 points off the bottom.
Yeah,
so
and
there's
3 points off 7th.
Yeah.
So it just really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mel Phillips, the history of her at Brighton, she came in under a year ago. She was appointed in April 2023. At that point in time, they were rock bottom of the table, and they had to do a massive escape. Not quite as dramatic as Leicester's escape from Christmas, but they were still bottom and she had to come in and steady the ship. They had the horrible season. Hope had been sacked earlier in the season after a really bad run of form. They appointed Jens Scheuer with presumably no due diligence done over him, because that was an absolute disaster. He was out the door. Amy Merricks took over temporarily. She was the interim. She was an assistant coach, so she took the interim role. And then Mel Phillips came in to steady the ship, and she kept them up. Huge deal. Massive summer as well. Lots of outgoings, people going, kind of getting out the cobwebs, I guess, and then bringing in some
bringing in her
new players, new players, new style, young players as well. Good quality players, but still needed time, I think, to build and understand what Melissa Phillips wanted, understand kind of the processes at Brighton, and kind of bed themselves into the club. And I'm sorry, but after 4-5 months of the season, to then go and decide that she needs to go.
Let me read you the quote from the press release, because this is really what's pissed me off. "This is not a decision which has been taken lightly, but we feel it is vital for the progress we want to see in the Women's Super League. We've invested heavily in the women's squad and infrastructure going into this season, and resultant performances have not been at the level we had expected given that investment. Newsflash, you don't just invest in a squad and then automatically get top 4. That's not how it works in the WSL," which I thought Brighton kind of knew. I've always felt like they were the shining beacon of a club that understood the longevity of women's football, and that it was long-term investment, that things took time. You weren't going to start suddenly seeing loads of money coming back from your investment. It was a project. The sport was growing. The idea of reaching the heights of your Chelseas, your Arsenals, your Man Cities would take time and investment. And from what I've heard from a number of their higher-ups speaking about the club, that was what they understood. That was their vision. So this naive kind of, no offense to the technical director, but this naive kind of idea that you just invest money and therefore you should be up in the top half of the table is just not what happens in any sport.
We've been having this conversation all season, right? And we've looked at the form of Leicester, of Liverpool, of Brighton, of, other clubs in and around that middle area, Aston Villa. And you go, it's about foundations. And I've said it 1,001 times on different podcasts, including our own. And it's not linear. Things will go up and down. But as long as you're showing signs of progress in the right direction, then you pretty much, are in good shape. And we've seen progress in terms of their identity of play. I think they beat City. They drew with United. They took Chelsea,
which they could have won, by the way.
And yes, some of the results, maybe that loss to Villa before Christmas was a bit terrible,
and unexpected.
Stuff like that happens.
Robert Villaham, who a manager we've all been lauding this season, lost 7-0 to Manchester City. He didn't get sacked. You can't just... It feels a bit like the results have been looked at in isolation with no actual look at the games. That's what it feels like. I think that's really unfair. Yes, they lost 3-0 to Chelsea, but if you actually watched that game, you would know that it was a difficult game, and that's something Emma Hayes even said in her post-match. You know, that first half, Brighton played well, like they were unlucky not to score in that match. So it feels a bit of a, I don't know, maybe they're just not very good at doing their due diligence by the sounds of it, but it's just really doesn't make any sense.
The weirdest thing of it all, though, is that you, Rachel, were literally on a press conference with Mel Phillips about
4 hours ago?
4.5 hours ago. No inkling of any problems whatsoever. 4.5 hours later, find out she's sacked. Have a new press conference tomorrow with the new guy who is going to be taking over for interim charges. He's called Mikey Harris, supported by Owen Fisher, and he's going to be taking over for the foreseeable future. He's got a UEFA Pro licensed coach, and he moves across from the men's academy, which doesn't necessarily scream to me of the experience needed to be in the WSL. But
he's a men's football, so that automatically qualifies you to do anything in women's football, apparently. I don't really understand doing the press conference either. Like, you know, they're not going to sit there and answer questions about this. Like, we're all going to have questions about it. They're going to say, refer to the statement, whatever. So what, like, brand new ideas are going to come in for the squad between now and the match? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's such a weird kind of approach, and I don't know. I'm just angry, and I don't understand, like, the realistic expectations from a club in a short space of time. Just seems really quite naive. And I was excited about Brighton this season. I pegged them as my dark horse, and you know, it was mainly because I really liked what I'd seen from Mel Phillips when she first joined in April. I really liked what I'd seen at the beginning. I thought they'd made some really good signings. I'm not disappointed at their season right now. I still feel there's more to come from them. So it was never like I thought Brighton were failing. You know, I thought they might punch a bit and punch up and maybe do what we've seen other teams do and do better than we expect them to. But I don't think they're having a disastrous season or a failed season. And I think the thing they were looking at, and what many teams actually, not just Brighton, are looking at, is actually beating the teams in and around them. They're all kind of pulling off these big wins here and there. So it's not an isolated Brighton situation. I just really can't see any kind of reasoning, and maybe more will come from it. Maybe we'll hear more over the coming weeks. But from, like, looking at the statement and taking the statement at face value, and that's all we have to go on, I think it's been a massive shock. And I think actually something you need to maybe start looking inwards on. If you've sacked Hope Powell, did a terrible job of bringing in Jens Schur, had to get him out the door, and now you've kind of panic sacked Mel Phillips, I just feel like maybe the managers aren't the problem.